Thank you, and nice to be here with you all. Here I am in southern Ontario, near Toronto, and we're having the same weather system that the gentleman in Massachusetts mentioned. It's in the 70s here. It's quite warm. It's remarkable. It's a second little bit of summer for us. We're all enjoying it. I'm going to launch right into a brief explanation of how I got into doing OBEs. And it started way back around about a year after my father died, about 1970, when I would have lucid dreams where he would be talking to me. I'd wake up in the morning and have this very strong, we didn't even call them lucid dreams at the time. He was talking to me and he would say, after being dead for about a year and a half, try to imagine I've gone on a long holiday. And of course, I was very puzzled. I didn't understand that. And had that happen 2 or 3 times. A few months after that, I came across the book Life in the World Unseen by Anthony Borgia, and that helped that sort of basic spiritualism exposition helped me understand what was going on. And so that's way, obviously, a long time ago, 1970. And in the intervening, that maybe the first 10 years through the 1970s, I read more spiritualism, theosophy, discovered the Seth books, the Castaneda books, in fact, the books from the Phinn Horn Garden talking about nature spirits. So a strong decade of reading and studying and thinking. And in that time period, I would have the odd, unusual lucid dream that would sort of make sense, sort of not. They wouldn't happen that often, once every 3 months maybe. And that would go on. After a certain point, I realized I was being trained. I read enough esoteric literature to understand that your guides and your teachers would do certain things in your dream life that would train you to be more efficient and more understanding at the whole system of projecting yourself and understanding the new reality. A couple of stories I often tell is they send you through a forest fire. And as you fly through the forest fire, if you forget that you're in your astral body, you'll panic and come back to your physical body. But if you remember that you're in your astral body, you'll realize that the flames of the forest fire and the smoke cannot hurt you. That's one test that I went through. Another one, they sent a little cartoon astral demon into my bedroom so that I couldn't get out. And I had to fight with this astral demon, just almost like a cartoon character in a Walt Disney cartoon, like the little fellow that's really angry all the time. I had to fight with him. And I really did have to fight with him. It was shocking. And the first time I gave up and went back to my body, and I woke up going, really, after half an hour, I realized what was going on. I tried to go back out again, and the little demon was gone. Now, this was a mental creation of the guides. I'm not saying it was a real demon, but it was a good facsimile. And again, it was another training thing. So you get a few of those over the years, and you realize, if you're reading the right books, that you're being trained. And you're thinking, what am I being trained for? And then around the mid-1990s, I started going to England for the crop circles, and I went 5 times, and I really entered the energy of that community and the energy of the crop formations, which are very transformational, as I'm sure you know. And that really boosted my understanding and my vibration. And at the end of that decade, around 1998, 99, I started to have a lot more lucid dreams, and I knew I had to write about them. A lot more travels in the astral plane, and the book Eternal Life and How to Enjoy It came out of that period. It was written around 1999, but not published until 2005. I couldn't find a publisher for the longest while. And then I did, and I sort of got launched after that. So a little while after that, after my first book, I came across more and more stuff about the Monroe Institute, and the Hemisync tapes, and the books of Bruce Moen, who wrote in detail about his time doing courses at the Monroe Institute and what he experienced. And that was a real boost for me. I started to do the various exercises that he recommended in his books. And I got a box of Hemisync tapes called the Going Home, which can take you to all the various focus levels, 23, 25, all the focus levels right up to 35. And I learned to more consciously interact with the deceased and in the astral planes. And I can't emphasize how helpful Bruce Moen's books were. And the website that he started, the conversation board called the afterlifeknowledge.com website. We exchanged our experiences on that conversation board. And it's a great help when you're starting out to exchange with other people and either get their experiences, or they would agree with yours or disagree. But it's a great help to be part of a community like that. Then the next question is difference between lucid dreams, OBEs, and using Hemisync. Well, with lucid dreams, you're sort of waking up in the morning or maybe even in the middle of the night with a strong memory of something. With OBEs and daytime projections that I was doing after a couple of years, I would lie down, listen to the Hemisync tape, quite often during the day in my lunch hour, and project and ask various guides to give me something to do, which they did for quite a number of months, doing basic retrievals. You ask at one point, children going straight to the afterlife, Wendy? Not always. If they've been killed in an accident, a fire, even a bicycle into a car, anything like that, they will often be following what their mother told them, and that will be never talk to strangers. So you will find, as I did and others did, a child sitting by the side of the road in which they died, and you have to find a way to communicate with them, because they won't always talk to you, because you'll look like a stranger, and the mother will have said, don't ever talk to strangers. So you have to charm them in certain ways, and you learn how to do that as you get better at projecting. You realize that you can change your form, change your looks, change your dress. If that doesn't work, you can always, if you're linking up with a guide, you can ask a guide to come, and that guide will show up as a kindly, motherly figure that will maybe be able to communicate with the child in a way that you can't. So there's a variety of options there, but I would say some children will go straight to the afterlife realms and their grandparents or whatever, but there's quite a few cases where they don't. And the shock of, any number of things, an earthquake, a tornado, a fire, will put them in a situation where they don't quite know that they're dead. And that, gives you a greater challenge as a retriever. And as you work on it, you just get better at it. Just like in any other situation in life, the more you approach it and work with it, the more efficient you get at it. You ask about the difference with Hemisync. Well, Hemisync is, I'm not sure I fully understand it technically, but underneath the voices of Robert Monroe talking and a little bit of quiet music, there are binaural beats, I believe they're called, and they're below your hearing your conscious hearing, but they affect your brain patterns. And there's one pattern goes in your left ear and another goes in your right. They're slightly different, and your brain tries to figure out how to make a harmony between the two. And that seems to be the trick. The harmony that your brain creates facilitates projection. And that's what I found. I found it very useful, and it made projections a lot easier. And, I did it for many, many months. And a lot of the counts of those hemisync projections are contained in my second book, More Adventures in Eternity. Lots of tales there, all sorts of interesting things. Retrieving people that are decidedly anti-church, anti-Christian, anti anything to do with spirituality, that might be atheists, but they can be ignorant and angry. And what happens is you wind up in a place that's sort of like a dark basement, and they're sitting there a little grumpy, and they won't talk to you. And if you do talk to them, they don't respond nicely. And this can be like an older person, doesn't have to be a child, as I mentioned before. And they will debate with you, they'll argue with you. And you might have to go back 3 or 4 times and talk to them again, and they'll say things like, "Oh, it's you again. What do you want?" And they'll have all kinds of ways of identifying you. If they're vaguely Christian or any kind of religious thing, they will maybe think that you're a demon come to tempt them. If they're completely atheist and materialist, they will suspect that you're a manifestation of their fantasizing brain that hasn't quite died yet. So there's quite a variety of situations. There was that initial old lady that I retrieved eventually. In fact, I never did retrieve her. What happened was, going about 4 or 5 times opened a little sort of door, and a family member that knew her a little better was able to get in that door and talk to her. And the 5th time I went, I think she wasn't there at all. I was told that she'd been moved on. So you can see there are times when you work away at this and don't actually have a success, but then you open the door for someone else to have a success. The children, I mentioned that before. There was an occasion where I found I could start going backwards in time, and I found myself very suddenly going under the soil, I thought, oh my God, I'm going into a grave or something. And it turned out to be something that I had done in a previous life, when the Vikings were around the 8th century invading Britain and just torching monasteries and villages and stealing all the women and killing all the men. And they were much tougher than the Anglo-Saxons that lived in England at the time. And but we were quite good at black magic, and I was. So I learned how to take Viking warriors and make them think they were dead and buried. And on this occasion, I was finding myself retrieving this Viking warrior that had been dead for over 1,000 years, or thought he was dead. It was obviously my karma to have him come out, and I got him out, and he was a bit, like, what's going on here? This is strange. And I took him to what I assumed was Viking heaven, where many of his comrades were there, and he charged off to be with them, and soon forgot me, and sort of in a celebratory dance party sort of thing. I know that sounds a little vague, but that's exactly what happened. And I knew it was my time just to leave. These remarkable things happen as you find out you can go backwards in time, whereas a few months before, you never even thought that you could do that. You were like, oh my God, can I do that? No, only Bob Monroe can do that. Well, then you find out, no, that you can do it too. But you have to get over that. You have to leap over that self-imposed limitation. Sometimes the guides will help you do that. Sometimes they will kick you into it. Various things happen that will help you sort of get over your assumed limitations. I started realizing that I could interact with people that had died in recent, how shall we say, disasters. There was a subway fire in Chicago that I read about in the papers. They reckoned 8-10 people had died. And I went there the next day, very, very soon, and I found myself retrieving the spirits of people that had died in a fire and didn't know they were dead or were too panicked to do anything, as people often are in a fire. And I basically just retrieved them and took them to an astral plane reception center. There's many astral plane reception centers where you can take the how shall we say, the shocked and traumatized deceased, and someone will meet you, a greeter will meet you, and you can take them and go back and get some more. And that was one of my earliest experiences of doing that. There was another interesting experience in the Iraq War of 2003, where obviously I knew there'd be lots of dead people, and I projected there. And it was an interesting time with my guides at that point. I was still asking for help and advice every time I went out of body, and they were starting to say, "No, Gordon, you can do this by yourself. We're not going to help you anymore." And I was like, "No, you have to help me. I don't know how to do this or how to do that," and they wouldn't help me anymore. And I was rereading. I'm sure some of you know about William Buhlman's books. I was quite influenced by a couple of his books that came out, 15, 20 years ago. And he was talking about achieving clarity in your out-of-body projections. And he developed a command called Clarity Now. And I was reading that, still thinking about my guides not helping me. And I thought, I can do Iraq now. And lo and behold, it worked. I went from this guy who thought he couldn't find his way to Iraq from Canada to a guy that was suddenly there, which sounds pretty simple now, but let me tell you, it was a struggle at the time. So I started roaming around. I came across a bunch of Kurds who were part of that war. They were as against the Iraqi army as the Americans were, and they had their own reasons for it, having been oppressed as an ethnic group. And I found that although they were, I would say, Muslim in name, their actual operating consciousness was of a more pagan religion that preceded Muslim faith. And they were quite good at understanding their psychic abilities. And I came across maybe a small platoon of them, about 8 or 10 men, all dead. And I offered them my assistance, and they turned it down. And they're kind of like, "Thank you very much, but we don't need your help. We know what we're doing." And that was the first time I did. And they didn't do it out of anger or ignorance or resentment. They really did know how to move around the astral. And so I let them be. And the next group was a group of Iraqi women, maybe 10, 12 of them, that were stuck earthbound. And I asked, I talked to them and I said, "Come on, I'll take you to, your heaven world. It's easy. Just come with me and I'll take you." And they said, "We can't go because we're sinners," or something like that. And I said, "What's the nature of your sin?" And they said, "We were escorts for officers in the Iraqi army, but we were forced into it." So, and essentially, by our understanding, they were forced to be hired prostitutes for these men. And of course, they had no way out of it. But by their religion, it was not criminal, but sinful. So they felt they couldn't go to their heaven. So on the spot, I made up this story about, well, there's a halfway heaven that I can take you to where you will be accepted. And for some reason, they accepted that. And so I took them as a group to a reception center where they were met by greeters. And the greeters at the reception centers, they seem to always understand what's going on. You never have to explain very much to them. They seem to know it. So they took these women off my hands. They were happy to get there, and I let them go. But I mentioned that as it was a very interesting situation where I had to improvise on the spot, and found that I could do it. On another occasion, I was taken to a man wandering, an Englishman, seemed to have died around the 1930s maybe, and he had died with a great guilt complex because he was a church-going Christian, but he had been seeing a local prostitute in his last few years, not telling his wife because he just was lying about it. And his wife had predeceased him, and he was not allowing himself to move on because of his sense of guilt and sinfulness and unworthiness, which with church-going people is quite frequent. It happens a lot. They're very lacking self-forgiveness, very self-judgmental. And with those kind of people, it helps if you can act like a warm-hearted evangelical, where you sort of open your arms and welcome them into the love of Christ. And it's a bit of an act, but it can be quite sincere, and it was on my part, because I knew that's what would help this man. He wasn't an evangelical. He was probably something close to a fundamentalist. But he accepted my explanation, that I was some kind of a representative of the Christ Spirit welcoming to heaven. And he went with me, and we found ourselves outside a church on the astral plane where people were going in for a service. And in the lineup of people going in, his wife was one of them. And she looked up and called to him and said, "John, where have you been? Come on, it's time to go to church." So he walks over to her, and then walks into church. And that, once again, I'm forgotten. You've done your thing and you leave. But again, that was an interesting situation where I had to improvise on the spot. And I know from talking to other newbie retrievers at the time, everybody has to learn to do that. And I remember one, again, on Bruce Moen's Afterlife Knowledge website conversation board, a woman that had contributed quite a few times said, put up a post once saying, "Well, I always wondered about you guys doing this stuff, and I never seemed to think that a woman would be accepted." And she said, "I was doing a hemisync meditation one day, and I found myself in an Arab country, and lo and behold, I was dressed like a man." And she said, "I didn't ask to be dressed like a man. I didn't think to be dressed like a man. I just did. And there I was." And then she was able to do, I don't know what retrieval she did, but she did something. And being dressed as a man gave her the confidence. And again, she was able to leap over that hurdle that said, well, women are accepted in this kind of work, and it's a man's work, and yada, yada, yada. So again, there's all these limitations that you can bust right through if you just sort of are confident. The question here about, are people who die nonviolent deaths always met by family members? No, some are, some aren't. There's a lot of people that are lost and confused, either through ignorance, denial, or unworthiness, as I've mentioned. And they're the ones that kind of need retrieved, even if I think it's almost becoming common knowledge that if people have a terminal disease that keeps them ill for a month or a year, they're usually so exhausted with the illness that they're quite ready to move on, and they do so quite easily, and that's generally true. But people that heart attacks, strokes, they die suddenly, they're often quite either A, shocked, or B, don't really know that they're dead, because in a matter of seconds, they're in the other world, and they feel real and alive. And when you speak to them, they don't quite get it. They want to debate with you, and they're not aggressive, but they are resistant. That can be an interesting challenge, but it's unless they're angry or strongly resistant, they can be persuaded. Well, it's a matter of vibration. Permanent residents of the astral plane that are functioning as guides, as we know lots of them are, their vibration is a little too high to reach down to the earthbounds that are on a lower level, either lost, confused, ignorant, angry, people that are meditating and projecting that are physical plane people like myself, our vibration is a little lower than the astral plane guides, and it's a little easier for us to manifest in front of these lost, confused, resentful, angry spirits. It's not necessarily easy, but it's easier for us than the astral plane guides. And there's a number of things you can do to raise their vibration. I learned at a certain point to use my third eye and project a higher energy onto an ignorant, lost, confused, dead person, and it raises their vibration a little bit, and that can help astral plane guides interact with them. And again, that's another thing that I sort of discovered as I moved through my, limitations, as I've said. Well, sometimes they're called rescues, sometimes they're called retrievals. Again, it's the lost and confused, ignorant soul that's in the misty borderland realm, as the old spiritualist literature used to call it, the borderland. It's often very misty. They're wandering around almost like they're in like a fog, like we would have a fog here on this world. And they don't know quite what to do. And they're puzzled, they're upset. They're, a number of situations. And you can just wander through that borderland level when you've got, this may sound funny, when you've got nothing better to do. And you'll find all kinds of interesting people that either will relate to you or will not, depending on how they perceive you or how their assumptions and prejudices are affecting them. If they think you don't mean them well, mean them harm, or they're so self-obsessed that they don't even see you. There's quite a bit of that. People who are in despair and depression in that level. And I noticed Sculpthorpe referred to this in his book that we were discussing recently. You will see people that will not even look at you. They just sort of wander around, head down, looking at their feet, and they just won't even see you. And you can't really interact with them at all. So there's a number of those. And you just have to accept that fact. It makes you sad that you can't help them, but until they raise their vibration a little bit or stop feeling self-pity, you can't really do anything. A lot of it is roaming around. Sometimes you get a request from somebody, will you go after my uncle? Will you go after my cousin? Will you go after my friend that died in this car accident? I keep dreaming about him and he won't, things like that. You get requests, but a lot of times you can just roam around and do what you can for those that you run into. And you'll often do, now these days I do it a lot when I'm in the middle of the night. When I was working with the hemisync tapes, 20 years ago, I would do a lot of daytime stuff because that's when I seemed to have a lot of time. I was working a lot of hours at the time. I couldn't really be getting up in the middle of the night and doing things without, wrecking my work schedule. Just to go back to the hemisync tapes for a moment, you'll find that when you use them, they're very useful, extremely useful, and will help a lot. And the Monroe people will talk about using the hemisync tapes until you don't need them anymore. And you think, oh, that'll never happen. But actually it does. Eventually you get to a point where, as they joke, when you take the training wheels off the bicycle and you ride the bicycle by yourself. And that's essentially what happens. It might take a couple of years. It might take a few months. I can't quite remember how long it took me, but I'd say probably a year anyway. But that's exactly what happens. Your brain learns to go into that brainwave pattern and you just do it. But when you're working with the hemisync tapes, you think, oh, I'll never get past this, but eventually you do. Well, the simple ones are like the ones that I've mentioned. There's more difficult ones that I've written about in my memoir that's probably going to get published by the end of this year, Moving Through Many Dimensions, but they are quite long and complicated. And in the text, I was looking at it yesterday, they're 15, 20 pages long because you go back several times and you interact. On some occasions, it's with junkies that are so used to taking heroin or opioids that when they die, they don't quite realize they die. They recreate their apartment or their bedroom or whatever and keep living in it, not knowing that they're dead. And they're even harder to reach than people that die, say, in a heart attack or a stroke, because they're so affected by the drug and they're so used to it. And they can actually, without knowing how they do it, they can recreate the syringe and the drug and keep injecting themselves. Now, it's a mental creation. It's not real, but it feels real to them. So you have to spend a long time entering their reality, and that can take quite a long time. But you just keep going back and working with them in the same way that you might, say, visit a friend who's depressed because their spouse has died or their children have passed on, and you take your time trying to help them out of the slough of despond that they're in. And you have to be patient and loving and, all that sort of a thing. And it's the same with a complicated retrieval. You just keep going back, and it doesn't really matter if you go back once a week or once a month, because it's not once a month to them. It may be once a month to you, but it's certainly not once a month to them. Their concept of time is just shot completely. So perhaps you'd like more information on that sort of a thing. I can go into detail, but essentially it's just going back and working on the situation in a patient and loving manner, and putting up with the sort of mental blocks that these people are going to give to you, because they don't believe A, who you are, or B, that they're dead.
Thank you. That's a really fascinating talk. What I'm wondering is, obviously you're rescuing people from all different languages. So is there some form of universal language that you communicate in?
Well, what I've noticed and other retrievers have noticed when we do this work is that it's mostly telepathy, and it's mostly, no matter what language their original language is, you seem to receive it as English. It's not like they're talking in Farsi or Russian and you don't get it. You just do. More recently, with the Russian-Ukraine war, which I've done some videos on, it's the same kind of thing. And the only issue is you will meet the dead Russians, and if they've grown up under communism and they're atheists, they won't believe that there's an afterlife. And you have trouble convincing them. But with the Ukrainians, who are, in my experience, predominantly Catholic, you don't have much trouble convincing them. Their issue is they want to stay and protect their homeland, and and you have to say, no, that's over. We're going to go to heaven, and your other people can protect your homeland. Do you see what I'm getting at? But it all seems to be telepathy. There's not a situation where I go, geez, I didn't get that Russian guy. You see?
Like, my primary question is the fact that, like, how do we tell that they're not, like, coming back and forth between here and there, versus the fact that I guess they need rescued?
Well, you try to interact with them and see where they're coming from. Just like if you were to see someone in your local park near where you live, and you might walk past somebody and think, oh, geez, they look really depressed, and you feel sad about them, and you might just like smile and say hello, and you'll gauge how they are from their reaction to just a simple hello. Do you see what I mean?
Gordon, my question is about the kind of spirits that you encounter in the borderlands. Is it always spirits who are atheist or angry or really locked into a religion? Do you ever come across spirits who maybe had some afterlife awareness, but somehow or other end up in the borderlands?
Yeah, that can happen from time to time. They know through their religion, even if they only had a bit of religion as a child, going to church and then not going. So they've got a basic understanding, but they're thinking, is that really true? You know, and people can be very influenced by the negativity of the daily news. They can get very depressed, just seeing the daily news and all the horrible things that go on. And so then they think, well, how can God allow this to happen? Or, this is just awful. Why should, the world feels more like hell than anything to them. So when they're wandering around, they're often contemplating that sort of thing and wondering how this can all be, and then they try to equate that with what religion teaches you, and it doesn't make much sense to them. So they're in a state of, how shall I say, mental confusion, and they're not necessarily, angry or evil or wicked, or necessarily, they're in some level of despair. Just, you run into people like that. And there's certainly enough information on the internet, on podcasts and various things, talking about conspiracies and frauds and, all that sort of thing that seems to go on all the time. And it makes people depressed. So I do find that you can run into people like that. And that any help?
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks, Gordon.
Very interesting presentation. I was wondering if logic ever helps. For instance, that fellow you met in the basement, probably didn't live in a basement like that in his, waking in his, when he was alive. And, you might point out, well, have you noticed things are different? Or for others, have you noticed that you never have to eat or you never get hungry? Or does that approach ever help?
Yes, it didn't with the case you're mentioning. That was actually an elderly lady, and her niece asked me to go after her, a living niece, at a meeting I was at, and she said, "Oh, she'll probably be angry and all kinds of stuff," because she was when she was alive. So I kind of dealt with her that way. But what you're saying applies very strongly to the intellectual atheists that I have encountered, and they're all on. Christopher Hitchens is one of them. I had several interactions with him, all of which are on YouTube, and he was very much into debating, and I knew he would be because I'd seen him, and read his books, and the American writer Susan Sontag. I contacted her many years ago, and she was kind of similar. And the scientist who was in the wheelchair and couldn't talk,
and Stephen Hawking.
I knew he was an atheist, so it was the same talking to him. Although he leapt over, all of them leapt over their limitations and got to the afterlife. But they had to sort of debate with me first before they would actually do it. So your point about use of logic, yes, with those type of people, it's very useful.
Right, thanks very much.
Did you talk to Stephen Hawking?
More recently, no, just when he first passed.
When he first passed, yes, okay.
And it's on my YouTube if you want to scroll down. It's in there somewhere.
Okay, I will. Because when he passed, I said, "Now, Stephen, you will see that you didn't know it all, and in some things you are wrong."
Yes, you were right. He didn't. And because I'd seen him talk on various podcasts and stuff, I knew he'd be like that. It was same with Christopher Hitchens and Susan Sontag and a couple of others.
Mm-hmm.
I knew they would be like that. Intellectuals from our culture, from Western culture, tend to be they're very intelligent. They're highly intelligent. But in matters to do with faith and spirituality, they're very weak.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't quite get that the intellect will take you so far but it's a dead end road. You have to start using your heart chakra to progress. They don't get that.
Thank you.
Gordon, I've read in several places that there's like afterlife hospitals, that some of these people that have these issues can go and get counseling and get help. Have you encountered any of these? And if you have you referred any of these people to these afterlife hospitals?
Yes. Usually I find them already there. There's hospitals, there's small little clinics that are very much like, countryside bed and breakfasts where there's maybe 10 rooms, and a lot of them are set up like that, and they'll be visiting nurses and stuff, but they look like a small country hotel with nice gardens and stuff, and people will recuperate there. And there's hospitals, of course, and I would mention to you in I think Bruce Moen's fourth book, he has a very interesting account of being in an operating theater watching spirit doctors heal people who think that they're still missing a leg, or that they're seriously injured, and they bring them on stage and they sort of use their hands and lights and manifest a new leg, so that the guy that thinks he doesn't have a leg actually does have a leg. So there's that goes on. I haven't done that personally, but Bruce Moen talks about it very convincingly. My experience is more just visiting these places and talking to the people that work there. You won't be surprised to find out that people that have been nurses and doctors, and I should also mention psychotherapists in this world, when they get over there, they sometimes, not always, continue with their interests, and they're nurses and doctors over there. And more recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've discovered through being asked about it by living physical psychotherapists, can I contact a deceased psychotherapist that was their mentor? And we do that. And there's an interaction where the deceased psychotherapist gives advice to the living one through me about cases that they're working on. And this is not uncommon. You should understand this, that a lot of people get to the astral plane and they might not necessarily be in a hell realm. They're just in a place where they need to still talk about their issues. So psychotherapy is also a big deal over there. It goes on almost as much as here.
Hi, Gordon. Great presentation. It said that we're given a spirit guide when we were born. What happens to them when we transition if they're not helping us in the transitions that you speak of?
Spirit guides often have several people that they're working with. Certainly newbie guides usually they do a bit of training and then they work with one person. And the spirit guides, in my experience, are very often people that are deceased, obviously, but they're people that we know from past lives. They're friends, comrades from past lives who agree to be your spirit guide because they're just friendly with you, then they care for you. And you've perhaps been a spirit guide to them hundreds of years ago. They swap roles. We swap roles just as much as you've heard that, your mother in this life could be your sister in a past life, or your business colleague. There's a lot of swapping roles, and the spirit guides are very much like that. And the more experienced ones can work with 5 or 6 people all at the same time without breaking into a sweat. So
where are they when you transition? Are they not helping you?
They will. If you're open to it, they will help you for sure. Now,
So
when I
wonder about the ones that you didn't have, that you had to help. What happened to their
well,
spirit
the
guides?
people that lower their vibration through all the things I mentioned: anger, jealousy, ruthless ambition, hatred, ethnic rivalry, all that stuff that lowers people's vibration, alcoholism, drug addiction. Then their spirit guides who they may have contacted with when they were children. Now that they're messed up adults, the spirit guides can't contact them. They're too far away. So that's a simple version of how that happens. Is that any help?
That's fascinating. No, thank you very much.
Sure, absolutely.
I really relate to what you just said in terms of just, having a condition and then you get the negative entities at night. I guess one of my questions is, and you only have to answer half of one if you want, and I can't help it, is just, is there a way of dealing with them, and are any of them inherited from family members that were depressed or died or anything like that?
I think they could be. I wouldn't make a definitive statement on that, but they could be. And I've often felt, also from my reading as well as my personal experience, that negative, malicious spirits just, A, it's like misery loves company, and B, they get a charge out of harassing you. They're so inverted, they get a charge out of harassing you. And as long as you let them do it, they'll keep doing it. You have to sort of fight it one way or another.
Thank you.
You said you'd had contact with Vikings. Did they think that they were in Valhalla?
The one guy that I had conscious contact with, I took him, I knew he was a Viking, and I went, oh my God, I was a black magic practitioner in 8th century England. Well, I guess I was. But the thing, what you have to understand is when an invading force is superior physically and armaments and are killing all your people, you have to invent ways of getting back at them. And black magic was one of the things that we did. We were good at it. We're much better at it. So when I knew this was a karma for me to get this guy back, and I did take him to what I thought was Viking heaven, which was Valhalla, and a bunch of his mates were there, and they were so happy to see him. He went trotting over to them, and he did this dance with one of the guys, like holding each other's shoulders and going around in a circle, and then they started drinking beer and partying. And it was like, I'm thinking, my God, they've been there 1,000 years and he just got there. Again, you're using your sense of time. They don't have that sense of time because they've been dead. Anyway, I did take him to Valhalla.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yes, there, as you're probably very much aware, there are many people who are light workers around the world and send light into various situations, send light, around the world itself, and also send light into the astral planes and into the borderlands, etc. And does that help? If it helps?
I believe it does, sir. Yes, I absolutely believe it does. I discovered years ago that there's a beam of compassionate, loving light that's been directed at Palestine for decades. And you can participate in that beam of light anytime you want. You can go in and out of it and just participate with the heart of compassionate love, and hoping that the people that are fighting each other or hating each other will, raise their vibration a little bit. That's just one country. There's one over Russia and Ukraine right now. That's more recent. Anywhere where there's a bloody civil war, you're going to find something like that going on. But again, as I answered another question, I'm reluctant to make any definitive statement about how much it helps. I believe it helps, but I couldn't put a figure on how much it helps. You just do it without expectation of results,
Thanks very much.
Sure. Okay, well, I would say if you're not either going to go to the Monroe Institute and stay for a week and do a couple of courses, or get the Hemisync tapes and practice with them, I have found that you can just use your daily meditation to do it. If you have a daily meditation, get yourself quiet and calm, and project to, just project outside yourself using your imagination, if that's what you feel you have to do, and ask for spirit guides to help you go and do a retrieval. They will help you. Now, it may not work the first time you try to do it, but just keep trying. And eventually you will find that guides will help you. They'll take you to somebody that needs retrieved, usually a simple retrieval. They won't give you a difficult one first off, but they're more than glad to help you. And it helps if you do the meditation every day, even if it's only for 15 minutes. But instead of doing a meditation and just achieving a mindfulness calmness, project to the guides and ask for them to guide you to a soul that needs rescued or help. In my experience, yes. For example, I live in a part of southern Ontario that was settled by Europeans. The natives were here, of course, settled by Europeans around 1830. And the pioneer graveyards, which there's one just a mile from where I live, and there's many others. If the people died around 1870, 1880, 1890, they were usually churchgoers, and they usually believed in lying there in their grave until Judgment Day. They truly believe that. And they died with that belief, so they're still there. So I sometimes go to these pioneer graveyards and try to interact with these spirits. And some of them are getting awfully tired waiting for Judgment Day. They've been there 100 years or more. Now, they don't realize it's 100 years, but they know they've been there a while. But often you will find a pastor or a church elder that is there with them, that is still trying to control them. And they will oppose me and say, what are you doing here? You're trying to tempt us into hell. You're a demon. So this argument sort of develops. And what I do is I create a column of light with my third eye that leads up to the astral plane levels. And I say to them, now listen, if you look up that column of light, you'll see your relatives waving at you from up there. And why don't you just float up there? And some of them do, and others don't. So it's a bit of a struggle against belief systems. Now, in more recent times, that belief in Judgment Day isn't as strong. It is with some levels, but when you find people that have been dead since the 1800s, it's very strong.
I have a question that might throw a monkey wrench into some of what you're talking about. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on the possibility that it's only a portion of the soul that stays behind in either the lower astrals or more earthbound, and that a portion of it does go on ahead and ascend or move upwards, but it's just maybe the fearful portion, the damaged portion, as opposed to the whole.
astral shell, as the Theosophists call it.
Yeah.
I think that's entirely possible, and it probably does happen in a lot of cases. When I'm involved doing what I just described, I tend not to think about that. I just go with what I'm doing, but I fully recognize that what you say is not only possible, but probably happens a lot. And even in a lot of the old literature that predates the past life regression literature, which talks a lot about, only 30% of us coming into incarnation and another 70% staying in the astral plane. I found references to that in theosophical literature from like 1930, 1935. And so one recognizes that is true. And when I try to contact the part of me that's still there, well, of course, he's quite a trickster. Every time I interact with him, sometimes it's like a mirror. I'm looking at myself, and other times he's completely different. And he just kind of chuckles at me, like he's trying to spring me out of my assumptions. So yeah, there definitely is. Now, whether these church-going Christians with the old-fashioned belief system still are in that position, I think you're probably right. But when I'm doing that procedure, I'm not generally thinking about that. I'm just trying to get them to move on. But yeah, that's entirely possible. Absolutely. Yeah, I started with my father many years ago, and I've met up with the others that are there. There's quite a few, all my mother and father and all their generation, aunts and uncles, they've all passed on a long time ago. So they're all pretty settled there. I've interacted a little bit with them, and a few friends of mine. And in fact, in my recent 2023 OBE journals, there's a couple of times where I contact friends just briefly, see how they're doing. And it wasn't the first time I'd contacted them. I just was kind of checking in on them. And once you've contacted with somebody for the first time, you can just sort of drop in like you're going to a friend's place for a cup of tea and stay for half an hour and leave, It's very much like that, because usually they're quite settled by then. I tend not to do that very much, Wendy, because I consider evidential spiritualism that's where we were 100 years ago. And I think it's a red herring to still be there. I don't think it's important, because evidential spiritualism, in essence, what you're doing is fighting your own doubts. So I say to people, I've said it to myself for years, but I say to other people that are still into this, throw that away, because as long as you're fighting your doubts with what you consider evidence, you will never get rid of your doubts. They will always be there. And get evidence. That recent Netflix series, After Death, there was the one guy there was one episode, and he got evidential stuff from 2 different mediums, and he still didn't believe. So what I see is this thing where people try to get evidence to combat doubt, but it never really works, because they're stronger on their doubts than they are on going to I say, go to your place of knowing. Know that you understand this stuff. Stop doubting. Just give it up. And that's hard for a lot of people to do, but that's what I recommend. Yes. Well, usually by email. I don't know. There's a few I know locally, but mostly by email, because this whole thing started with the internet, right? So you wind up talking to somebody in France or somebody in Italy or somebody in California or, whatever. I understand what you're saying. And there is a member of my family, not my father, extended family, and we were on opposite sides in that war between Scotland and England in the 13th century. And I had a vision of, I killed him with an axe in the back, and I thought, oh, that's why we don't get along in this life. Now, we weren't mortal enemies, but I realized, oh, there's some lousy karma there. But we've all got that. We've all been soldiers and defenders and victims in past lives. All of us. There's no escaping that. It's part of your education on the planet. You have to do all this stuff in order to, how shall I say, choose love over evil or whatever. You have to know what both sides are like in order to make that free will choice. So if you don't know what that karma is, I would just suggest try to even out the energies with unconditional love. And if that doesn't work, separate yourself from the person that is causing you all the difficulty when you're able to. Obviously, when you're 3 years old, you can't do it. You have to wait till you're an adult. But with the understanding that you knew this when you were born, you were told all this before you were born, and then when you're born, well, obviously you're a baby, but as a child, you don't remember this stuff. But we're all in that position, one way or another. So that book I recommended, Sally Joy's Lost Soul, Wise Soul, which you'll find on Amazon, she probes that quite deeply through a lot of clients' regressions, where she finds these clients chose the negative, dark path life after life and got in a real mess and had to dig themselves out over a period of time. And I found it very illuminating and helpful in understanding how that can happen. Some of them are, yep. It's several of my very early retrieval experiences that I made videos out of, called Retrieving the Victims of Violent Crime, parts 1, 2, and 3. Now, you will have to scroll right down because they were done about 12 years ago, but I talk about each one in detail. One was, a lot of it was picked out of the local Toronto newspapers. I just see a crime and I think, oh, I'll go see what they're up to. And about 12 years ago when I got interested in this. And one was a bouncer at a club that died in a sort of a fight when he was trying to, the usual stuff, trying to get drunk people out of the club, and somebody had a knife and the bouncer gets killed. And he was pretty angry and was looking for vengeance. And I talked about how it wouldn't, I interacted with him, and I can't remember if I talked him out of it or not. There was that one. There was another one where a recent immigrant to Canada from a European country, were they refugees? I can't quite remember. But he obviously was mentally unbalanced, and he killed his wife and 3 children, and then killed himself. And I found them, and they were standing around their dead bodies, not knowing quite what to do. I just tried to, I moved them on to an astral plane reception center because they were just so lost and confused and clinging together as a family. They were easy to move on. There was criminal cases that were well known here in Toronto area, but not anywhere else. Another man who was one of these split personalities. Everyone in the neighborhood thought he was the nicest guy. Everyone at work thought he was a cool guy, but he was really abusive to his wife and children. And one day he showed up where his wife worked and shot her in a public place. It was just bizarre. He shot her in a shopping mall somewhere downtown. The news came on, and he was like hiding from the police right in downtown Toronto. And in a very busy area, they kind of were talking to him through loud megaphones and whatever. And they had a sniper up on a high building. And as soon as they got him out into the street, the sniper killed him. And because they thought that was all, because he still had a gun. So anyway, I went after him a few days later, and he was doing his nice guy act in the kind of middle astral planes. I found him at a barbecue. And everyone thought he was a cool guy, like friendly, sociable, here, have a beer. And I thought, I talked to him, and he kind of looked at me like, oh, you know who I am, don't you? And I said, yeah, but, I'm not going to spill the beans on you, but you're going to have to face your karma at some point. And then I left him because I thought it wasn't really up to me to sort of drag him to court or anything. But it was interesting how he manifested the light side of his personality, the sociable, friendly guy, and not the abusive sort of maniacal killer. I was quite struck by that. It's in one of those videos. I forget which one. I believe so. I didn't check out where they were. He just shot the wife. I think the kids were at school. Like, he went to where she worked downtown. They lived in the suburbs, and was angry at her. And that was the amazing party. Like, I think he shot her in a public place, scaring the devil out of everyone else that was around. Yeah, I've done that quite a few times with disaster scenarios, earthquakes, and different things like that. Turn anything where there's a number of people die. You can go backwards in time to just after the earthquake hit, like an hour or whatever, and it's not hard to do. Once you go over your limitation, where you say, "Oh, I can't do that." Well, you do it, and then there you are. Bruce Moen had an interesting meditation that he taught us all years ago. He said, when you go to an earthquake or anywhere where buildings have collapsed, you look at the people, there's always dead people underneath the collapsed concrete and steel beams and stuff. You imagine the collapsed stuff not there, because it's astral plane stuff. It's not the physical stuff. They're already dead. and they're surrounded by the thought forms of the concrete and the steel beams. And you imagine it not there, it disappears, and then they stand up. Now, it sounds quite magical, but it does work. You combine that with going backwards in time to just after, because you might read about a disaster like a week later, or whatever. So you just eliminate time. It's really, when you're in the astral, time doesn't matter at all. What happens when you're doing a mass retrieval or you're participating in one? I don't participate in them all. There's lots of people do it. They project, and what you see is, what I usually see is lots of little light orbs flipping around. You just know that that's a projected person, and they're in the form of a light orb. I believe so. Plenty of people have taken photographs of them and videos, so there's no doubting they're. Some of my videos, and as you know, I've done lots. People will email me.
459.
Yeah. So people will say, "Oh, Gord, I saw a couple of orbs in that video. Did you see it?" Of course, I'm so busy doing the video, I don't see them. But people go, "Oh, yeah, there were a couple went right by while you were talking." I do recognize the reality of orbs on this level. I find people are quite adjusted to it because of some years ago, there was a number of television programs that focused on orbs, and there's nothing like a TV show to make people aware of what's going on, people outside of the New Age community. I found that a lot. Yeah, a lot of people did that, partnered retrievals. Sometimes, well, what happens is you do it, but then you don't actually remember, or you and the other person have different memories of what happened. A lot of times over the years, when I'm working with people on a one-to-one basis with distance healing or any number of issues that I work with, they will say, "Gord, you came to me in a dream, but you didn't look like you." And I have to go, "Well, I'm sorry, but I guess I was playing a little trick on you or whatever." A lot of that happens. And there's a certain element of fun and game playing goes on. Well, I think we've got lots of choice. You have a free will in any situation to stay in the situation, leave it, or try to make it better. There are energetic forces in any situation that will put up barriers to changing the situation. Like, you may want to change your job, but your finances aren't quite right. It's a little too risky, and you have to wait a few months and change your job later. But I do believe that we have complete free will. And that includes, in my opinion, the plans that you make before being born. If you feel by middle age that you want to change those plans, if you're aware of them, and I've said this to many clients, you have your pre-birth plans are not written in stone. You can always change them. You can always say, "That's it, I don't want that anymore, I'm out of here." Now, there may be karma attached to that decision, but understand there's karma attached to every decision you make. There's always results to your actions, no matter what you do. But I do believe in complete free will.
Well, thank you so much. I was just sitting here absolutely fascinated by everything you shared with us. I've got 4 pages of notes and more books to read. So.
I know how you feel. Yeah, I know how you feel.
Yeah, it just never ends, And I hope you come back, because I think you're a wonderful guest.
Thank you very much. I will come back.
I have a question for you, if you don't mind. When we think of somebody who has passed, does that mean that they're present in our space with us?
When we think of someone that has passed?
Like, I think of my mom every so often, and I just wonder, is she present when I'm thinking of her? Or do I call her?
Sometimes they are, yeah. Sometimes they come for a visit and they're like, a ghost that's in the room with you, and you start thinking about them. And there's a fair bit of even old spiritualism where a spirit will say through a medium to the sitter, "Oh, I was with you yesterday afternoon when you were reading that book or working in the garden, and I sent some energy to me, and didn't you start thinking about me? And the person will go, oh, yes, I did. So there's a fair bit of evidence for that. I would not say that every time you think of somebody, they're there. That's up for you to sort of decide for yourself. But it's definitely not an illusion. Often they are there, or they can be in their place in the spirit world and think carefully of you with love, and that thought will come down to you, even though they're not in the room with you. You understand?
Yes. And so when you do the work that you do with guiding the spirits on the other side, you pick up on their predicament and go to help, or do they actually call on you?
Some do. If you have time to go through my videos, and I know there's a lot, but you'll see sometimes guides will say, Gord, this person wants to talk to you. This person wants to talk to you. And after a few days, do you remember when Liam Neeson's wife, Natasha Richardson, died in a skiing accident about 10 years ago? She just hit her head. She wasn't wearing a helmet. And she went home and then died the next day, internal bleeding. Guides brought her to me. I'd already was doing stuff on YouTube. And they said, Natasha really wants to talk to you, Gordon. And I wasn't sure what happened there. Something's happened. I'm not seeing you anymore. But so I did speak to her. And essentially, she wanted to say to people through me, don't be stupid like me. Wear a helmet when you're skiing.
Well, thank you for your presentation. I'm going to watch it after we're done here.
Again, I'm sorry I was late, but the discussion I got was amazing. So please come back. I went to a very similar get-together with a Polish guy who does out-of-body experience. And what you were saying and what he was saying kind of like overlaps. So that was really, a feast for me. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, dear. You're very welcome.